Imagine for a moment a different kind of battlefield, not a scorching desert, not a dense jungle, but the snow-choked, jagged spine of the Norwegian Arctic. The temperature plunges to -40, a cold so intense it steals your breath and freezes the very metal of your weapon. The wind screams down from the ice cap, turning the air into a blizzard of knives. This was the stage for one of the most brutal, unthinkable contests ever conceived between two of the world's most legendary fighting forces. The French Foreign Legion and the British Commandos. The challenge, a 40-mile trek through this frozen hell, carrying everything needed to survive on their backs. This wasn't just a test of endurance. It was a test of will, a direct clash of two diametrically opposed warrior philosophies. One force, forged in the crucible of sun-baked deserts and foreign wars. The other, born from the dark, wet cliffs of World War II Europe. Both believed they were the ultimate masters of survival, the pinnacle of mental and physical toughness. Only one could be right. What happened on that mountain would shock both sides to their core and rewrite the understanding of what elite soldiers could truly endure. If you think you know what toughness is, if you believe you understand the limits of human endurance, get ready to have every assumption shattered. This is the story of the 40-mile trek shock. Now, before we plunge into the blizzard, I want you to do something. Look at that subscribe button. Right now, that button is a line in the snow. On one side are those content with the surface-level stories, the sanitized versions of history. On the other side are those committed to uncovering the raw, unvarnished truth of what these men endured. Clicking it is your first step into that frozen wilderness with us. It proves you're not just a passive observer. You're someone who seeks to understand the true cost of excellence. So, will you cross that line? Will you join the few who want the full story? No matter how harsh the choice is yours? Let's begin. Our story starts not in the cold, but in a place of simmering professional rivalry, warmed by pride and competitive spirit. It was the late 1980s, a time of shifting global politics. But within the closed circles of special operations, ancient rivalries burned as hot as ever. The British Royal Marines Commandos, heirs to the legacy of the daring World War II raiders who struck fear into Nazi-held Europe, had built their reputation on ruthless efficiency in the world's most unforgiving climates. Their Arctic warfare training was legendary, considered the gold standard for operating in the cold. To them, the Arctic was a second home, a domain they had mastered through decades of grueling winters in Norway. On the other side stood the French Foreign Legion, perhaps the most enigmatic and romanticized fighting force on the planet. Their motto, Legio Patria Nostra, the Legion is our fatherland, spoke to a different kind of toughness. These were men without a past, forged anew in the relentless heat of North Africa, the steamy jungles of Central Africa, and the harsh mountains of Djibouti. Their endurance was born of desert marches, of carrying incredible loads across endless sand under a punishing sun. They were the ultimate generalists, adaptable, hardened by real combat across the globe, and fiercely proud of their ability to suffer and overcome. Their toughness was not climate-specific, it was a state of mind. The spark for the confrontation was a seemingly innocuous joint training exercise in Norway. Legionnaires and Commandos were operating side by side, and as is natural among elite warriors, conversations turned to boasts, then to challenges. The British, confident in their Arctic supremacy, likely made comments about desert soldiers struggling in real cold. The Legionnaires, with their characteristic silent pride, absorbed the slight. The challenge crystallized, a pure, unadulterated test of military load, carriage, and endurance. A 40-mile trek, cross-country, off-trail, through the most brutal terrain the Norwegian Arctic could offer. Full combat load, no support. The loser would not just be defeated, they would be humbled in their supposed area of supreme expertise. The British Commandos, certain of their advantage on home terrain, accepted. They saw it as a formality, a chance to professionally educate their allies. The Legion saw it as a point of honor, a chance to prove that the Legionnaires' will could triumph over any environment, any condition. The bet was made. The stage was set on a frozen mountainside at dawn. The two teams that assembled in the pre-dawn gloom were studies in contrast, a preview of the philosophical clash to come. The British Commandos were the picture of Arctic optimization. Their kit was specialized, lightweight where possible, and meticulously organized for the cold. They wore layered high-tech thermal systems designed to wick moisture and retain heat. Their rucksacks, while heavy, were packed with British military precision, every item serving a calculated purpose for survival and mobility in the snow. They moved with the economical, energy-saving gait of men who had done this 1,000 times. They were technicians of the cold. The Legionnaires, however, presented a different image. To the British eye, they might have looked almost primitive. Their kit was robust, often heavier, and less tailored to the specific conditions. But this was deceptive. The Legion's approach was not about optimization for the environment, but about overcoming the environment through sheer, unbreakable resilience. Their training emphasized uniform loads and a standard pace. The famed Legionnaires, step that could be maintained indefinitely, from the Congo to Norway. They carried their weight not as a burden to be minimized, but as a challenge to be dominated. As they stood in the falling snow, there was no chatter, no last-minute adjustments, just a silent, formidable focus. They did not see a frozen wasteland. They saw another obstacle to be marched over, and then they were off. The first miles were deceptively manageable. The initial adrenaline, the competitive fire, pushed both teams through the deep snow. The British, using their local knowledge and superior navigation skills for the terrain, likely set a strong, confident pace. They worked as a cohesive unit, communicating efficiently, picking the best routes through the ice and rock. The Legionnaires followed a solid, implacable block of men, their rhythmic, measured tread eating up the distance. The British method was cerebral, tactical. The Legion's method was elemental, rhythmic. The real enemy was not yet each other, but the mountain itself. As the hours bled on and the teams climbed higher, the Arctic began to assert its true character. The temperature plummeted further. The wind, now a constant, deafening roar, scoured any exposed skin. Snow changed from a powder to a hard, granular ice that offered no purchase. Every step became a labor. Lift the leg high against the wind, plunge it into waist-deep drift, fight the suction to pull it out, repeat. Thousands of times. This is where philosophies began to be tested under the immense pressure of reality. The British Commandos began to face their first crisis. The cold-as assault on their technology and precise systems. Moisture management, critical in sub-zero temperatures, became a nightmare. The intense exertion caused sweating, but the outer layers, designed to block wind, trapped that moisture inside. As they paused for navigation checks or brief rests, that sweat began to freeze against their skin. The sophisticated layering system was failing under operational tempo. Cold, wet cotton is a death sentence in the Arctic, sapping body heat 20 times faster than dry air. Shivers turned to violent, uncontrollable shaking, the first sign of hypothermia. Their hands, even in gloves, grew stiff and clumsy, making simple tasks like adjusting a strap or reading a map a monumental effort. Their energy was being drained not just by the march, but by their own bodies fighting a losing battle to stay warm. The environment was defeating their systems. The Legionnaires suffered too, of course. The cold was an impartial torturer, but their suffering seemed to follow a different curve. Their heavier, less breathable gear might have been colder and wetter, but their psychological conditioning was different. Legion training, particularly its infamous Marcher ou Moria, march or die ethos, psychologically prepared men for a state of constant, miserable endurance. They were not trained to manage suffering, but to accept it as the default condition. While the Commandos fought against the cold, trying to fix it, the Legionnaires simply absorbed it as part of the challenge. Their pace, that relentless Legionnaire step, did not change. It was a metronome of willpower. They did not stop to adjust layers or complain. They lowered their heads against the wind and marched. Their crisis was not one of failing systems, but of pure physical erosion, but they will seem to be made of something even harder than the ice around them. At the halfway point, a subtle but critical shift occurred. The British team, though still moving, was being consumed by the cold. Decision-making slowed. The elegant, energy-saving gait broke down into a ragged, exhausting slog. Arguments might have fled over route choices or pace. The collective focus fractured into individual battles for survival. They were now expending enormous mental energy just to continue putting one foot in front of the other. Their tactical advantage eroded by physiological collapse. The Legionnaires, in contrast, appeared to lock into a deeper, almost trance-like state. The individual disappeared into the unit. They moved as a single organism, the stronger men instinctively supporting the weaker, sharing loads without a word spoken. Their famous discipline, a discipline born not from punishment but from a shared unspoken code, became their heating system. To stop was to fail the man next to you. To slow was to betray the Legion itself. Their momentum became self-sustaining, a physical manifestation of group will pushing back against the void. The British were fighting the mountain. The Legion was becoming part of it, an indifferent, moving force of nature. Then came the storm. If the previous conditions were harsh, what descended was biblical. Visibility dropped to zero in a whiteout. The wind reached speeds that could knock a man over. Navigation by sight became impossible. This was the moment of truth. For the British Commandos, masters of Arctic technique, this should have been their domain. But their techniques relied on baseline conditions, the ability to see, to think, to execute a plan. The storm removed those tools. Exhausted, cold-soaked, and mentally depleted, they were faced with a problem their training manuals couldn't solve: complete sensory overload and disorientation. They were forced to halt, to seek shelter, to wait it out. The march stopped. The Legion did not stop. Through the howling white nothingness, the British would have seen, or rather sensed, a dark, blurred shape moving past them. The Legionnaires, navigating by compass and sheer bloody-mindedness, did not break stride. Their philosophy had no contingency for waiting out adversity. Adversity was the point. The storm was not an obstacle to their progress, it was the progress. Every step into that blinding fury was a victory. While the Commandos huddled, conserving the last of their warmth, the Legion was burning its last reserves of energy to conquer the unconquerable. It was an act that defied tactical logic. It was pure ethos in motion. The aftermath was a study in shock. When the British Commandos, battered and exhausted, finally reached the endpoint, likely hours after the storm had cleared, they found the French Foreign Legionnaires there. not just there, but standing, having already set up a rudimentary camp, melted snow for water, and begun the recovery process. The Legionnaires were utterly spent, pushed to the absolute edge of human capability, but they were functional. They had not just completed the trek, they had dominated the conditions that had defeated the specialists. The shock waves from that 40-mile trek reverberated far beyond that Norwegian mountainside. For the British Commandos, it was a profound and humbling lesson. It forced a complete re-evaluation of Arctic training. They realized that technical superiority and environmental knowledge were useless without an almost fanatical, deep-seated resilience that could function when all systems failed. They began to incorporate far more brutal psychological stress testing into their training, focusing less on comfort in the cold and more on operation in spite of it. The Legion had shown them that will could be a more powerful tool than any piece of gear. For the French Foreign Legion, the victory was the ultimate validation of their entire creed. It proved that the mentality forged in the deserts of Algeria could conquer the ice of Norway, that a soldier's spirit, hardened by the universal currency of suffering, was the ultimate adaptive tool. It cemented their reputation not just as formidable soldiers, but as perhaps the world's most psychologically resilient fighting force. The trek became a foundational legend within the Legion, a story told to new recruits: you can overcome anything. We proved it in the snow. For the wider world of special operations, the event became a classic case study. It killed the myth of the perfect, optimized soldier. It proved that elite performance is not about having the best answer for every problem, but about having the unbreakable will to find an answer when all your best ones have failed. The clash wasn't really between France and Britain, or even between the Legion and the Commandos. It was a clash between two ideals. The ideal of the perfect system versus the ideal of the unbreakable human spirit. On that day, in that frozen hell, the human spirit, raw and relentless, won. If this story of unimaginable endurance, of a will stronger than a blizzard, has impacted you, then do not let this moment pass. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and right now, as you sit in warmth and comfort, you have no excuse not to join a community dedicated to uncovering the world's most incredible true stories of human fortitude. Your subscription ensures you won't miss the next tale of where true limits are tested. So, what do you think? Could you have taken a single step in that storm? Could your mind have overcome what your body was screaming was impossible? The Legionnaires did. Let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your own stories of endurance, or simply pay your respects to the sheer willpower displayed by both of these incredible forces. And if this glimpse into the extreme edges of human capability has left you wanting more, if you need to discover what other unbelievable truths are waiting to be uncovered, then don't stop here. Click now on the video appearing on your screen to dive into another story where the impossible became reality. The next revelation is just one click away.